Our last session is Vlad Kolesnikov talking about covert security with public verifiability.
All right, thank you. So I'll talk about two results in this area. The papers are called Covert Security with Public Verifiability, and one of them that says almost for free. That's joint work with Alex Malazimov from AsiaCrypt 2015. And the other one is Covert Security with Public Verifiability, faster, leaner, and simpler. That's our upcoming work in Eurocrypt with Cheng Hong, Jonathan Katz, Wenji Liu, and Xiao Wang. So covert security, people know what it is. This is clicking. It's a slightly different model, and I'll explain it. There is not a very long line of work in this model. To me, that's a little bit surprising because I think the problem is really well motivated, and I'll motivate it as I describe it. So okay, so it's obviously inside kind of the area of secure computation. We know what it is. We want to compute the function without revealing the inputs. And I'll just give a really brief overview because we're building on the garbled circuits and the cut and choose way of doing things inside garbled circuits. So I'll briefly review what is going on when we want to compute a function using garbled circuit. There is two players, Alice and Bob, and Alice is the circuit generator. She constructs a garbled circuit. You can think of it as an encryption of a Boolean circuit that you want to compute. The encryption includes the encryptions of all the wires of the circuit, including the input labels, including the input wires, and so we need to transfer those encryptions to Bob, both for wires that are owned by Alice and owned by Bob, and some of it is done using oblivious transfer. That's the functionality FOT that everybody knows. And then we send the garbled circuit to Bob, and then and the wire labels, and Bob will evaluate this garbled circuit under encryption. Okay, so this is very well understood, very highly celebrated approach. It is secure against the semi-honest Alice and against malicious Bob. Okay, so what's missing here? Well, that is that Alice in fact can cheat if she wanted to, right? In the semi-honest model, we kind of assume that away. We assume that nobody cheats, so that is fine. But what we really want is a malicious model where whatever you do, right, you cannot gain advantage. But that's kind of expensive, so people looked at a covert model that was proposed by Aumann Lindell in 2007. And that model kind of gives a very nice trade-off, I think, that in the sense that a malicious party can cheat and in fact can succeed in cheating, but gets caught with a fixed probability. And then you can argue that it's depending on your utility function, what you want to achieve with the secure computation, that a lot of the time you don't want to do it, and rational players will not do that. Okay, so in pictures, that's kind of the same as the protocol that players run, and we say that there is a deterrence factor that cheating Alice if she's cheating, she's going to get caught with some probability epsilon. Epsilon is non-negligible here, and the probability 1 minus epsilon, she's able to cheat. And the point of this model is a trade-off with efficiency, and much more efficient constructions are possible in the covert model compared to malicious. Okay. So how does it work? It's kind of a simplified, or the kind of the most naive or most natural way of cut and choose protocol that you can do to achieve this covert security. Okay, because this public verifiable covert security, the topic of this, I'm going to briefly review of how the covert works. So now instead of asking Alice to generate one circuit, Bob asks Alice to generate lambda circuits, where lambda is a parameter. You can think of it as a small number, perhaps 2. or 10, right? And basically repeat everything that Alice does lambda times and send lambda garble circuits. Then Bob will choose at random a small number between 1 and lambda, and the number that he chose will be the circuit that he will evaluate. And he will ask Alice to open all of the other circuits, all of the other stuff that Alice sent Bob. And if Alice is not able to open, then that means she's cheating, if she's not able to open them correctly. And Bob will have caught Alice. Okay, and if she opens fine, then that means that with some high probability she was acting correctly. Okay, so that is very nice, and it makes a lot of sense, but we can do a little bit better. Or depending on your model, we can argue that actually is significant benefit if instead of just being able to catch Alice, what if we additionally are able to prove to anybody who wants to listen that Alice in fact cheated, right? So this way, now I can blame somebody much more broadly, much more, will be available to everybody. Like for example, if a bank, yeah.
Vlad, you mean that covert security definition doesn't imply it, but the protocol before does it?
Which, huh?
The one you just showed in previous,
It doesn't achieve proof.
I can show the garble circuit, ask the person to sign it, and show it.
In a second. That's a good idea, but yeah, so for example, if bank is doing something funny in your account, maybe they don't care if you stop being their client, right? But, and if you leave, fine. But if they cheat with you and you're able to post the proof of that online, then that's a much more significant deterrent for the bank. And I would argue that that's almost as good as malicious model, as a malicious deterrent, just because how powerful it is. And you can put it on a blockchain. So that's seriously. Okay, so what we want is some kind of public verifiability condition, right, or property that if we catch Alice, then we can post it. Okay, so it seems kind of obvious, like Mutu said, hello, it's obvious. And that's what I thought, actually, and that's why I didn't write the first paper on this, because it turns out that this actually is not so obvious, and it will be clear quickly. So okay, so so people who wrote the first paper is Asharaf Orlandi in AsiaCrypt 2012. They define the model and give a construction. So what is the model? The model is that the Bob, if he detects cheating, then he's able to produce some kind of certificate, right? That certificate can then be shown to a judge. The judge here is non-privileged, meaning that he doesn't know any kind of special secret. It just can be any member of the public, right? And he can determine, the judge, whether or not the cheating in fact occurred, right? And of course it has to be, security has to go both ways, meaning that cheating Bob should not be able to frame Alice. So if Bob is misbehaving, then he cannot simply, if Bob is misbehaving, he cannot construct a proof of cheating and blame Alice incorrectly. Okay, so that's the model. There is some subtleties how you define the model, but intuitively it's clear. And so one obvious thing to do, well, just ask Alice to sign everything. Right, and then if she cheats, then you'll be able to show a couple of inconsistent messages, and that will be proof of cheating. So that doesn't work because when Alice is confronted, when Alice is asked to prove something, she can abort, right, without giving a signature. And so now Bob will not have signed conflicting messages between Alice and Bob. Okay, so naively, so straightforwardly, this doesn't, you cannot just ask Alice to sign everything. You will not achieve public verifiability this way.
You're saying soliciting a response is not valid?
Yes, yes. Yeah. And, right. So, So this problem is solved by Sharaf-Orlandi by saying that we, instead of OT, we're going to use something they call signed OT. So intuitively, the idea here is that we don't want Alice to know what we are asking. We don't want, because if we know we're asking, oh, show me index I, then Alice can, that's index I misbehaved on index I, I'm better not show my signature, right? So instead what we want is that we can put this query inside OT, and inside the oblivious transfer, Bob will choose the index that he wants to query, and Alice will have to provide kind of proofs as inputs to OT, and in this way Alice wouldn't know what was being challenged. Still, that doesn't solve the problem, because Alice can provide the input into the OT, so she knows she's going to prepare inputs. This input corresponds to index 1, this input corresponds to index 2, and so on. She's going to say, I'm going to cheat in index I, so she's going to provide input into the OT where the signature is invalid. So this doesn't quite solve the problem. You need the mechanism that we always obtain a valid signature no matter what Alice puts inside the OT. So if she puts the wrong thing inside the OT, fine. We're going to get a signature on the wrong thing inside the OT. Yeah?
So I don't get the definition of covert, that you also will get a proof if the sender is aborted without being malicious?
So the point is that if the sender aborts, with the guarantee is that the sender never got an attempt to cheat. So the sender can always abort.
That's not cheating.
That's not cheating, because there's no advantage. You started execution, you haven't learned anything, then you abort it, fine. You could have aborted in the very beginning. Nothing happened. You didn't get the chance to cheat and be caught. So once we have this signed OT primitive, then we can do what I said. We can push this querying, this challenge inside the OT, and Alice cannot avoid this because she provides, because her signature will come out in the end, right? And so Sharaf-Orlandi realized this primitive using, they build it based on Pikert, Van Kunatan, Waters maliciously secure OT protocol. So, okay, so that's good. That's a big first step. There is issues with efficiency here. Well, it's an expensive protocol, and kind of importantly, it's not compatible with OT extension. Okay, and everybody expects OT extension to work with their MPC, right? So, so because of that, the cost of the Sharaf-Orlandi protocol is not that great. It's fine, it's good in many cases, but you can do better. Okay, and so with Alex, we looked at that, and we designed a OT extension, a signed OT extension, and I'm going to briefly say what we did. At the high level. We did a bunch of other optimizations, but I'm not going to talk about it. Just high level how the signed OT extension works. So that's a little bit tricky because OT extension is kind of very simple once you look at it for a long time, but immediately it's not that obvious, but I'll do my best with pictures. So the OT extension works, there's two OTs going on inside. There is a pre-OT protocol, like a preparatory OT that is run, where the receiver prepares a matrix here. It has kappa columns, so kappa is going to be our security parameter. Think of it as 100, right? So he prepares 100 columns, and just randomly chosen. The columns can be very tall. And the sender prepares a single kappa bit long string. Okay, and then what they do, they're going to run OT, where it's going to run kappa OTs, where the input on the sender is going to play the role of the receiver. He's going to input in each iteration, in each instance, he's going to input this in his bit SI, and receive either the column that the sender chose or the column that the sender chose XOR R, where R is a selection bit vector for all the bunch of OTs that the receiver wants to do. So receiver, remember in OT, has a M bits. Those are the selection bits for the M OTs, where M is a million, right? And so this is a million tall, and this R is a million tall, and so you can XOR bitwise, okay? So what happens now, the first OT gives to the sender, it gives a green column, where a green column is either equal to the orange column, or it's equal to the orange column XOR the choice vector of R. The very cool observation here that if you look at what the sender received, if you look at it row-wise, then you can see that this row here, there's two options what could have happened, and it's if the choice bit in this jth row was equal to 0, then this green row is going to be equal to the orange column, to the orange row being across the columns, and if rj was equal to 1, then it's going to be equal to this yellow row of the sender XORed with the orange row of the receiver. This is a really simple, you just write it out, but for me at least it's always hard to imagine it immediately by looking at it, so just trust me. Or I can ask Yuval, he'll nod, and okay. So the property here is that what we achieved is that we have, we've shared some randomness between sender and the receiver, where the receiver is thinking of one value, and the sender has two possible values that can match it or not, and it's kind of roughly corresponds to OT. And so the sender will use these two possible values, either the row that he received or the row that he received XOR with his choice vector, right? He used that as two possible keys. And the property is that depending on the choice vector of R, the orange vector is either going to be equal to the green vector or to the green vector XOR orange vector, okay? And so if we use random oracle or something slightly weaker in the right way, then we can use that to encrypt. You can use it to generate a mask with which we're going to encrypt the actual secrets that we're sending, and we're able to obtain OT. Okay, so this is a rough, extremely quick overview, just barely enough so I can proceed to show where the signed OT component comes in, signed OT extension comes in. So what I presented is not maliciously secure, but it can be massaged in a way that people know how to do it into a maliciously secure protocol. So what we want to do now is we want to be able to prove things. We want Alice to be able to sign, we want to be able to force Alice to sign both input secrets that she's sending. So now notice we are in the situation where there are two explicit things that Alice is sending to Bob. And we can ask Alice to sign these two explicit things, right? So this yj0 and yj1. And if this is in contrast with the traditional way we're thinking of OT, where Alice provides two inputs to OT, and Bob receives one and has no information about the other one. That's kind of the functionality view, and that's how we will look at it. But here, two things are sent, and two things can be signed by Alice. Okay? And we can abort if Alice's signature on Y, on either of the Ys, is not valid. Okay? So you see where I'm going with this, that now Alice can sign things that she's sending to us, and we can refer to that signature. Okay? So now we're going to say, this is not quite final, there's a couple of more touches we need to do, but for now we can say that the certificate that Bob is able to obtain after this OT extension is these two messages that she sent together with the signatures that Alice provided on these lines, together with the orange row of Bob. So together, all of this defines a signed secret that Alice receives, that Bob receives. Okay. So that's not good enough because there is big dependence on this, on the orange row, and nobody knows what this row is, and Bob can modify it however way he wants. Okay, so we want to prevent, so the next finalization of this protocol is that we want to prevent, we want to reduce or remove Bob's ability to massage this, right, to his advantage. Because if he modifies this, right, what will happen is that effectively the message, when you decode what is being sent, will be not what Alice sent, right? And this way you can frame Alice. So what we have to do is that we have to now guarantee that Bob is not able to modify this. So there's a difficulty because we cannot just reveal this because it reveals, so firstly, it reveals all the Bob secrets, right? So we cannot just reveal this orange row. So our goal is we want to kind of bind, we want to tie Bob's actions to these columns, right? But without revealing these columns. So one key insight here is that the sender, Alice, she already knows some of the columns because the columns that correspond to her choice bit equal to 0, she receives those columns. Okay, and right? So, so what we can do is that we can say that the orange row vector included by Bob in the signature, it must match the columns according to Alice's view. And if it doesn't match, that means Bob is cheating. Okay, but we cannot just reveal, so Alice cannot simply kind of include these columns into her signature because knowledge of these columns or revealing what are these columns reveals information about her yellow vector, about her secret. So we cannot do that. Well, we can because we can increase matrix size. We're not going to reveal all of them. We're going to reveal just some of these columns, and it's going to be good enough. Revealing some of these columns reduces our security, so so the secret, the length of the secret that Alice has now has shortened. So we're going to compensate for it by having a slightly longer matrix, and that works out. Not quite. There is one more last thing that to win, the receiver doesn't have to fully change the orange vector. He can flip a single bit of the orange vector, right? He still can win, but here we can solve it because we can restrict how this orange vector can be generated. So we don't allow it to be fully random. It has to be an output of some PRF or random oracle. We call it random oracle. Now we're done. So the way that now to put it all together, let me quickly click through because there's another construction I want to discuss, is that the receiver generates this orange matrix in a way that this row is output of random oracle based on some secret key, right? And then they proceed as before, except, so Alice signs the yj0, yj1, Alice signs the y's that she's sending, but in addition, under the signature, she puts the index of the columns that she wants to be fixed. She wants to be, these are the columns that I know of. This is some of my zeros. And Bob's, if Bob wants to provide a certificate, then his orange vector better match these columns that I have. So she does that. She declares those columns and the values of those columns. And so now Bob's certificate, to be valid, it must match, so the output of the random oracle, when Bob reveals everything, it must match those columns. Okay, so everything is aligned and works, and the cost overhead is relatively modest. We have to have 76% larger, wider OT extension matrix. There are a couple of things where we can do better, and this is sort of the motivation for the new work, and this is what I'm going to talk about next. So one thing is that this construction, I talked through it very, very quickly, but I'm hoping the video will allow people to, rewind and look at it. So this construction is kind of highly detailed. The intuition here, I think, is reasonable, but when you actually implement it and look to the proof, is quite detailed, and its complexity is the enemy of security, kind of. It is also is reliant and intertwined with the OT extension protocol that we are using. And if we're using a new or better OT extension protocol, then we need to redo everything. We did not provide implementation, partly because it was quite painful, and it has large witness. We didn't optimize for witness, and I'm not sure we can make it with the KM15 construction. And we do want short witness because blockchain, right? So the new idea is to get rid of all we know, and let's start from scratch. Build from standard primitives, standard OT, standard everything. And the main idea is that the random seed, we're gonna de-randomize everything as much as we can, and the random seed that is used for this construction is going to be the witness for everything. Okay, so how? Well, again, we're going to use a cut and choose approach. Alice will choose lambda. So we're gonna do the semionis thing, but lambda times, right? But now Alice, for sure, she's going to do, all of her actions are going to be based on the random seed that she chooses. So she's going to choose lambda random seeds Si, right, for each of the lambda instances. And then she's going to use that. We're going to get those SIs as witnesses, right? And if we find a contradiction in Alice's messages, that will be proof. So the only thing, now we're back to this thing, to the requirement that we need to, that I wanted to do before, is that we want to make sure that Alice always signs that SI. That's where we're always stuck. It always come back to it. How do we make sure that Alice signs it? So I'm going to describe it in two steps. One, first I'm going to explain how we're just going to catch a cheating Alice, and then I'm going to say how we can prove a cheating Alice. So we're basing it on cut and choose, and Alice has lambda instances. So what we're going to do is that obliviously via OT, we're going to allow Bob to learn all of the seeds SI that Alice uses in building her protocol messages, right, except for one. The one that we don't learn is going to be used for evaluation, okay? So suppose we are here at this stage, and now, and so we're not proving it. I'm not insisting on signatures yet. So once we're at this point, Alice's execution is deterministic once we know the SI, okay? And we detect cheating simply by reproducing what Alice should have done based on the seed that we received. And if it's not exactly the same that the messages that we're thinking about, then that means Alice is cheating, okay? Okay, so cheating is a deviation from the deterministic protocol. Fine, but that doesn't quite allow us to prove cheating. So how can we do that? Well, we're going to ask Alice to sign each message. That's a big step, but that's not everything, because Alice can still, those original SIs that we're talking about, we still need to have her signature on those SIs, right? And here is kind of the cherry on the top idea. I mean, it's it's kind of natural, but that's the finalization of this. How can we force her? We make Bob also deterministic. So Bob is going to derive his randomness from some seed SB. He's going to commit to that seed. So CB is a commitment of SB. And we're going to ask Alice to sign that commitment. And now, if you think about it, the signature of Alice on Bob's commitment, together with signature of Alice on every message that she sends in this original OT protocol, right? It's essentially a signature of Alice on the message that is output inside the OT. Because the verification of the signature will be just to reproduce Bob's actions. And if Bob in real life was able to produce, to output something as output of OT, the verifier, given Bob's randomness, he can repeat that and obtain that same output. And everything is signed by Alice because Alice did sign Bob's seed in the beginning. Okay, so this is kind of the main finalization trick. There is a couple of smaller issues. So okay, so for example, revealing Bob's seed, we need to reveal Bob's seed as part of a certificate, right? But that's fine because we're going to choose different seed for every instance of the Lambda instances, right? And so we're not going to revealing those is not a problem because those are not real executions. We're not going to reveal the randomness that we use in the real execution. That's fine. And we have to reveal the inputs that Bob is using because that's part of the OT that Bob is participating in, part of the signatures. But it's also fine because we for the check instances, those are the ones that we care about, the OT inputs we're always going to set to 0. So there is nothing to worry about revealing. This is a defamation-free protocol. So if you just think about it for a second, intuitively, the reason is that Bob's certificate basically binds Bob to behaving honestly. So the verifier, right, because Bob is deterministic, and he committed to his randomness in the very beginning. As part of certificate of cheating, he has to open this randomness. And the verifier will see, did every Bob's message was consistent with Bob's randomness. And it only accepts the certificate if, in fact, it was. So that's the whole thing. I wanted to briefly show the performance numbers, and they're very, very nice. The certificate is 354 bytes long. Here is this is the transcript of the original OT. There is a couple of hashes of some other OTs. C, the signature. So everything put together, it's a small secret size. It was implemented, I think, partly, at least, I think that people weren't. I think people really should be excited about the PVC, publicly verifiable covert. But partly maybe why they weren't is because implementation is kind of painful and it was not available. It is available now. The numbers are, 5, 10, up to 60% overhead compared to semi-honest, and is comparable with covert. The difference in the ranges is because of how inputs relate, what's the size of the input relative to size of the circuit. But it is very good performance. Compared to malicious, this is, as far as I know, this is still state of the art. Malicious, we're about, again, between 6 and 17, I see here, X performance improvement compared to malicious, while achieving slightly smaller goal, but I would argue that very, very similar security guarantee. The communication is almost identical to semi-honest. It's maybe a couple of percent greater. And well, with this, I want to conclude and say this is a great model. You should use it in all of your compilers and use it everywhere. It's available and open sourced. Thank you. Yeah.
How much of this is specific to Yao's protocol? Can you compile other semi-honest protocols in this way by committing to seeds?
Two-party?
Anything.
I think so. We didn't think about it because what else is there? But yeah, I don't see any. I mean, you have to fit into this mold of, you have to hide it inside OT. The challenge go inside OT, right? And then Alice cannot avoid signing her response. Well, it depends. Yeah. So for our.
When you say 10 to 60%, what was it for?
That's not probability. That's overhead.
Yes, but for what probability?
Oh, for 1/2. Right. Sorry. I mean, we don't need to send extra circuit. We need to compute extra circuits. If you want to do 1 out of 10, then your computation increases. Your communication does not increase at all, right? So I'm not sure what would be the performance hit there. Small factor. Yeah, it depends on how powerful is your computation. Thank you.